Hey guys, so Skinamarink was a very interesting film that I watched recently on Shudder. This film is basically about two children who wake up in the middle of night to find out that their father is missing and all the doors and windows have disappeared. So this film is directed by Kyle Edward Ball, who has a YouTube channel called Bite-Sized Nightmares. I recently watched the short film that Skinamarink is based off of called Heck. I personally enjoyed it. There are changes from Heck and Skinamarink. I guess I would describe this as analog horror, basically like a subset or subgenre within found footage that includes like distorted noises, music, emergency broadcast, like anything that you can't really explain the more you look at it. That's the best way I could really describe analog horror, and obviously it has to do with like VHS tapes and things like that. I would think of like shows like Ghostwatch and anything to that nature would be like analog horror.
Just a quick interjection, guys, because I wanted to clarify analog horror based off an article that I read on Collider. It is described or defined as a subgenre of horror that mostly resides and is told within short films and videos on the internet, but it also has broken its way into video games and feature films. These are stories made to seem as though they are being told by means of late 20th century technology, like old and warped VHS tapes, retro video games, cassette recordings. You get the idea. While very similar to found footage, these two are more like brother-sister subgenres. Found footage is entirely told from the first person and can do so in any variance in video and audio quality, shot on old film or HD cameras. Analog horror is much more specific in its stylistic choices and narrative ideas. Usually disturbing images and cryptic messages are found beneath layers of distorted footage and sound, making the experience of analog horror a disorienting one. Coming in the forms of commercials, educational tapes, and other forms of produced media, analog horror is made to prey on your fears by means of nostalgia. It's a subgenre that attempts to twist the feelings of the familiar into something bizarre and inhuman.
This film definitely has those elements where it's unconventional. There's not a straightforward narrative. It's like threads of a story that you have to decipher and just like pick and choose like the bits and pieces that presented to you. One of the first things that I really enjoyed about this movie would have to be the under and overexposure with the lighting techniques, everything that was like omitted that you couldn't see in the dark corners, or like when it's in the hallway, or focus on like the furniture or random framings of walls. The more that you look at it, the more that you peer into like this like void of just darkness and like the grainy footage, I was like thinking to myself, is there something there? Is something not there? So it does play that kind of psychological effect. Another thing that I really enjoyed about this movie is definitely the sound design. I think Kyle Edward Ball did a tremendous job with getting you immersed in the atmosphere of what's taking place, especially when you can't really tell like what's going on. I mean, there's subtitles, you can hear them, but the way they sound, it's kind of creepy and eerie. So I think that's pretty much it, where it ends with like my likes. Basically the lighting, like the effect that it had on deciphering what was happening in those obscure places, and then also the sound design. But let's move on to my mixed feelings and what I disliked about this movie. So one of the things that I really just have to be transparent with, and this is no disrespect to the director, but the pacing of the film, like, yeah, there are some interesting shots, especially because they're at a low angle point and it's getting that POV from the children, and you're getting these random still shots or panning shots. But I don't understand the runtime of this movie. I don't. I'm sorry. And that's not me trying to be rude. It's just I found this movie incredibly boring. And I was trying to be as immersed as possible. I was in bed. I was in the dark. It was, the perfect setting. But I just had a hard time kind of getting involved with it and getting really sucked into like the characters, which is tragic because it involves children, but it just wasn't really that entertaining. I think that was my biggest problem, was like, and the biggest flaw with this film was that I kept dozing off. But I will say, like what I said about the sound design, every time I kept dozing off, which happened at 3 points in this movie. So with what happens to Kaylee, the sister, and with what happens to Kevin, and there's another point as well. I think it's with the mom and the dad, like when Kaylee's in the room and he's telling her to look under the bed, that's another creepy scene too, especially not knowing what could be under there, because as a viewer, you're expecting you know, a jump scare or something like that. But I just like those moments with the jump scares like woke me up. The sound design, I was like jolting, like what the? But even those moments where I dozed off, I didn't really miss anything because I think I gathered enough. A lot of the things that are transpiring, it's really repetitive with these children maneuvering around the home with all the windows and doors just like disappeared. So after watching this movie, like once the end credits roll, I gave this movie a half a star out of 5 on Letterboxd. But I will say, post watching this movie and then like trying to really wrap my head around everything that happened and what it all meant, I went down a rabbit hole, guys. And I had like 4 theories. And the more I thought about it, I was like, I don't hate it as much, you know, as unconventional as it is, and you know, it doesn't follow like a straightforward narrative. It's not terrible. Like it's so hard to like talk about this movie because on one end I'm like I was bored, but it made me think. So I'm like, how do I do this? So I'm just gonna tell you this now. Usually I like wait to give my like Letterboxd ratings at the end, but I changed my score to a 2 out of 5. So I mean, I know that's not like a great score, but it's still better than giving it a half. So there is artistic merit there. I can't discredit that. Not at all, not for a second, because this movie had me thinking so many things. So let's get into the spoilers and things that I thought transpired and what it all meant, my theories on Skinamarink. So first and foremost, if you want to take the film for its literal meaning from what was presented, I took it as there was in fact a malevolent entity that was trying to lure the children away into this void and was playing puppet master with the parents, or maybe even just presenting the parents and presenting certain things to the children. And that was something that I kept thinking. I was like, why are these children like whispering? The whole time they're whispering. So there was just so many thoughts, but that was one of my theories, that it was just some type of malevolent entity that could bend time, that had that sort of control over everything in that home. So the other thing that I thought about too was that the parents aren't really present. It seems like they're neglectful. There may be some form of abuse. And so I thought the entity could be some form of like a metaphor where it's stemming from real life trauma and the parents are like these abusive monsters or have become these monsters, and they're the real like villains, if you want to call them that, of the movie. So it made me think, like, what if like the mom and dad, right, the relationship went in shambles and one of them just like snapped and killed the entire family, so then they're all in some form of purgatory and they have to like relive this, which would, to me, would make sense just because they're constantly like replaying everything. Like there's one point at the end where the entity or presence is telling Kevin to take the knife and I think stab himself in the eye. And you see like the blood, and it goes to that with screaming or yelling, and then it just loops back, loops forward. Maybe also we're just looking at things from Kevin's point of view, from, like I said, stemming from trauma, or it could also be that from the fall, he could be in a coma, which would kind of make sense with like the title where it was like, I think 572 days, and you see like the stack of all the toys. So then I think to myself, with all that information given, a coma would be plausible and he may be getting closer to death. I'm just not quite understanding why they were whispering. That's what's confusing me. If anybody can answer that, why they were whispering, please let me know. Was it just to not alert the entity? I'm not sure. Or like I said, maybe they're whispering not to disturb their parents, but then again, they were looking for their parents. Dude, I could go down a rabbit hole just thinking about this, just because it is just jarring to me. But I really want to hear from you guys and what your theories are. Let me know if I'm too far off the path, but I thought I was like going in some wild direction that I was like, this is like either too blatantly obvious or I'm not thinking hard enough. But then when I went to Letterboxd and saw other people's reviews after I typed up like my own theories, I'm not too far off. So I'm like, okay, so other people are thinking like similar things as I am. So I really want to know your thoughts on Skinamarink. What did you guys think about it? And what do you think like ended up happening to Kevin and Kaylee. Keep a lookout because soon I'm going to come out with my review of Infinity Pool, which is another one that just had me in my thoughts. Really excited because body horror is one of my favorite subgenres, and that movie definitely delivered in the grotesque nature. Like that whole, I'm not even going to talk about it. Let's just say a lot of fluids. So I hope you guys are having a wonderful night. I'll see you guys soon. But yeah, bye guys.